grab my questions here. So I'm happy to introduce Erina Malarkey, CEO and founder of Remarkably, Barrett Newberry, CEO and co-founder of Lease, and Asaf Goldberg, all the way from France, business development builders. And I'm going to take a couple minutes here and we'll start with Erina. If you can give yourself a little introduction to yourself and maybe why you started, although we won't go down the rabbit hole too much. So 2 minutes and then Barrett and Asaf.
Deal. Nice to be here tonight. My name is Erina Malarkey. I am the CEO and co-founder of Remarkably. And Remarkably, my co-founder and I actually concepted out of a previous company that we owned together. So prior to Remarkably, I owned a company called VMO, Virtual Marketing Office, and then prior to that, I'd been in-house to a large owner, investor, developer for a number of years. And over sort of this decade in the space, we kept hearing this drumbeat of customer pain, which was, what am I getting for my marketing spend at the asset level? What's working, what isn't? And then furthermore, people felt like they had no mechanism to actually handle the management, measurement, and implementation of a pretty significant spend. So US multifamily, $3.3 trillion industry. By conservative estimate, it spends about $5 billion a year on marketing and leasing, and there was no mechanism for this. And so we, about a year ago, and I always joke, it depends on the day whether I think we were brave or smart or foolish or just like plain old dumb, we decided that this was just too big an opportunity to ignore. We closed our successful company and we started a software company. So we officially incorporated in January. The platform launched end of March. We're into 14 markets already. And really it was this notion of saying, how can you turn marketing from this black box into a strategic, revenue producing, predictable lever in your asset management function, and really think about how you can add a new gear, if you will, to the asset management bike. So we were just super excited and inspired about the idea of, how can you fundamentally change value creation for the largest asset class in the world, beginning with residential right now. So how's that? 2 minutes.
Great.
Okay.
Thank you. Barrett.
Barrett Newberry, Lisa. The way this all came about was I was a military kid, and as a military kid, got picked up by a professional sports team, and then traveled the world. And in spite of all of that activity and really finding myself in a different place, at a different time, in a different time zone, I was continuously trying to recreate myself. Whether it be credit, whether it be establishing myself in that particular market. And as things have progressed in this wonderful real estate market that we have, with Airbnb, with all of these different types of property types, durational types, we are now further fracturing our consumer demographic, and there's really no solutions that are serving that unified consumer. That unified consumer is going to spend as much money on their long-term rent at times as they are for business and leisure travel. It's kind of crazy when you start putting those figures together and really truly understanding what it is that economic impact is going to have, and yet we don't have a true way of really being able to unify that consumer across the the rental market. So we developed Lease, and I co-founded this with the chief legal officer of DocuSign and a couple of other really cool people, and we've just really put our heads together. And as Erina put it, it was very appropriate. I think you cry at night and you try and figure out how the hell to wake up in the morning and actually show up at the office. But as we've seen, things are actually coming together. Every prediction pretty much that we had is now coming to bear. So we're super excited about that.
Great. Asaf?
Hey, so my name is Asaf. I'm originally from Israel, from Tel Aviv. I'm an architect, educated in Jerusalem and LA. I've been doing my MBAs in Paris for the past year, and I joined Builders, which is basically a Paris-based startup. And we accelerate real estate development, because I think that one of the most disturbing facts is that the whole value creation in construction and the whole real estate development hasn't basically changed for many years. And what we're trying to do basically is leverage on data, BIM, and collaboration online to basically accelerate real estate development and try to change this whole chain and accelerate the whole process. We're operating in France, and we're now expanding into the US market, launching our Seattle prototype. So I'm basically here meeting stakeholders, trying to understand if our whole algorithm, data, and business model fits this kind of market, and then take it forward for the next stage.
So, Asaf, my first question is, why Seattle? I mean, not that I think everybody here feels invested in Seattle and feels great about Seattle. I don't know about you guys, but there's a reason I'm here and not New York or LA or other places. Not that those are bad places, but why Seattle? I mean, you're reaching across from Europe. Really curious.
Well, just for the sake of coming here for the first time, I guess. No, I guess that when we choose a city to focus on, we're trying to find kind of similarities within the market we're already building in France. And the first thing we'll try to go is trying to understand the zoning code and to see if it makes any sense. Because basically what we do, we code this whole zoning code, and we have our own algorithm that can actually create this formation of the structure according to the zoning regulation. So Seattle, thank God, is very transparent with its zoning regulation. I know it's very complex, but it's still very out there online, and you can get it. And actually, our algorithm from France works pretty well within what's going on right now in Seattle. The real estate market is doing very well. And we find there are many similarities that work the same, so that's a try.
Great. Now, let me back up for a moment. One of the things I want to ask, and Erina, I'm going to start with you. Why PropTech now? So, and let me kind of put a little bit of context around this. We hear out there that of all the laggard industries around technology, real estate is one of the biggest laggards. That there's still a tremendous amount of old way of doing things. Why now, though? Why the explosion now? What has changed? What would make you do something crazy like shutter and a successful company and jump into starting, honestly, a very risky software company?
Yeah, so it's a great question, and it's one I actually have a pretty strong feeling on. So real estate is of course highly cyclical, right? We all know this. It's highly cyclical, and it's had this massive boom. And so I think particularly in the multifamily space, there's been a degree of if you build it, they will come. And so while the last decade, all of the other industries were sort of getting smart and kind of going through this digital revolution, if you will, real estate has sort of been sitting there to some degree with its head in the sand because things were good enough. Rising tide lifts all ships. I build my building, it gets filled up. I'm happy with my rent rates, my cash flow is going. I feel good about my net asset value, and life is good. And so I think what we're seeing though is that real estate, while it is a laggard, and I'm just in the midst of a seed fundraise, and actually the first slide of our deck is a dinosaur that begins with a small dinosaur and moves to a large dinosaur. That real estate has all of a sudden realized that it needs to be leveraging B2C and B2B best practices that all these other industries have been, and that the dollars that people are spending as people are anticipating a potential softening, a potential cooling of the market, I think we're seeing that people are feeling like dollars are gonna have to work harder, they're gonna have to work smarter, they're gonna need better transparency, and why wouldn't you use a better kind of tool set? So people of course ask us, who are your competitors? Our biggest competitor is an analyst and a spreadsheet. And an analyst in a spreadsheet is valuable and can do a lot, but there's a certain capacity at which they can't. And so I think you start to sit there and you start to look and you start to realize the market conditions are changing, and there's this toolbox available to you that's going to provide this massive upside. And I think people are really starting to take it, and once that starts to happen, the bar raises. And now suddenly you're going to be competing against software with an analyst and a spreadsheet, and it's kind of like a knife to a gunfight.
So let me dovetail that and kind of bring it to you, Barrett. Does the change in generation, so we're seeing a huge generational change between the baby boomers who are retiring and the millennials who are now rising and kind of in that area. Is that affecting this rise in PropTech, and how so?
Yeah, I mean, it's affecting it dramatically. And I think that what we're seeing right now is just across every market. You know, we don't have to talk about real estate right now. We talk about every other industry in the world here. We've got a consumer demographic in general that when they speak, it affects your business. And so I think, you know, it's really interesting here when you start talking about the multifamily space, because the multifamily space can really kind of ignore their consumer. It's, hey, listen, I've got an asset. It continues to kind of, you know, increase in valuation, and as long as my renters pay their rent and don't call me, I'm good. And that is such an interesting reaction when you start thinking about them as a consumer. Your renters are consumers, and I talk about this all the time, in that they're going to be spending money. They're spending, you know, a great deal of their capital. In Seattle, I think it's They're just now over 50% of renters are spending over 50% of their income month over month, and that is only going to increase. And so when you start thinking about this, you start thinking about the dynamics that creates and the voice that they have when it comes to social connectivity, when it comes to Yelp, Glassdoor, all these different places that are their social outlet, it is going to begin redefining the business models that we live by as well. And so I think that that's something that has been kind of the main reason that we developed Leasera is simply to combat that, not by trying to stamp down, but by trying to appreciate.
What challenges are you seeing for maybe the old guard in trying to convince them, or do they need much convincing that your younger generation are going to, you don't do a good job on your property, you're not going to hear about it in a complaint letter, you're going to see it out there on the internet and all of a sudden wonder why maybe you're not seeing as many renters come by or potential clients. Are you seeing this kind of activity?
As many kind of more high-profile individuals out there are coming to realize, once it's out there, and so I think that is just, it's the very same reaction when it comes to property owners, in that, hey, listen, if somebody says that you have zero security and then post something about an assault or something worse on your property, those people, other people looking for that property and trying to understand, like, what is it like to live at that particular property, are going to hear that. And so you really have to start trying to direct traffic, essentially. And it's in that you have to start appreciating your consumers, you have to start appreciating your renters, and really actually start looking at what is it that you're doing as a property owner or operator that starts serving the needs of the consumers as well, going deeper into, it's not just risk mitigation, it's amenities, it's how do you hear the consumer and know where you're going to be spending money next quarter. Your consumers are going to tell you, and that's the brilliant thing, is that we all think that we know the right way, and as owners or operators or leaders of any particular community, we all think that we know what everybody else wants. And yet, most of the time, when you realize, when you hear what it is that's coming out, you start realizing that there's probably a pretty different path, and sometimes a cheaper path. So,
there's traditionally been a lot of margin in building multifamily, particularly. And the owners of, over the last 10 years, actually, except for a small downturn, have had it really good without using much technology at all. What's changed? I mean, what's to make an owner these days go, I need to apply some technology, use your technology, instead of going the traditional route, especially when there's still a lot of margin left there?
Yeah, so I think that's the basic question. Basically, there's no problem, right? So why fix it? There's no problem for a startup. That's like a horrible starting point if there's no problem. But we actually see a great opportunity, because we see great margins, but we actually see opportunities to even create those margins even better. So what we're trying to show those developers that they can actually create leads. They don't have to wait until they can actually get someone telling them, hey, there's something happening there, maybe you should check it out. So what we're trying to offer them is to generate those leads for them. That's one thing. Second of all, we're trying to talk about saving time, because using data technology, we basically save all those feasibility analysis kind of period time, going back and forth with your architect, trying to understand how much you can build, trying to understand financially wise, how much you're going to get out of this project. So everything basically creates much more revenue and profit for those developers, saving a lot of time. So we see an opportunity that those developers can actually go for.
So tell me more, though, about how, are you seeing a feedback from what's happening, let's say, in Erina space and Barrett space around the actual running of these things? Are you seeing that now come back in more rapid changes in how properties are built, what amenities are being asked for? How is that changing the value proposition there for builders and owners?
Yeah, so I think that that's one of the main things that I've been facing right now, is because we come from a different market. We come from a different, where developers basically build and they sell their apartments. And that's it, that's the end of the story. And coming to the US, it goes for a different model. Basically, we're talking about developers who build something and then they operate it. And that's part of the whole financial analysis. And that's part of whether you go for a project or not. It's a deal breaker, yes or no. So I guess for us, that's one of the adaptations we need to do when we culturally go overseas, whether it's Seattle or somewhere else. It's trying to understand how this whole model of building something, demolishing, building, then going to managing a property actually goes with this technology. I have to say that for now, we've been working with 3 of France's biggest developers. And I feel like there's no real understanding of how the whole housing needs and framework is changing. I feel like people are building as if they built 10, 20, 30 years ago. Apartments are the same, mixed are the same. Things are changing, and what we're trying to offer them basically is how to adopt in a more educated way to those needs out there. But that's part of my understanding of the US market so far, is that this whole cultural thing of living, for example, is different. And I have to relate to this astonishing number, 50% out of the income going for rent. That's insane, as someone who's renting in Paris. And I've been I've been looking for an apartment for more than a month in Paris. You need to show that you have more than 3 times the rent in your net income at the end of the month. So the whole regulation-wise, it's completely different. So yeah, it's a completely different, area to explore.
Erina, I'm going to kind of toss almost the same question, because you're getting out there and you're marketing, you're really deeply involved in this space. What are you seeing? Are you seeing certain data being asked for? I know I'm kind of giving you an open-ended question, but I think you can kind of take and run with it.
Glad you did, because I was going to jump in. So thank you for saving me the embarrassment. So it's interesting. So Remarkably began working on underperforming assets. So people would have some sort of high degree of pain. I have this building, I'm treading water at 70% occupancy, I can't seem to move the needle, I'm losing $100,000 a month in terms of target cash flow, and the only thing anyone has told me I can do is drop rent rates or spend more money on marketing. But I don't even know what I'm getting for the marketing dollars I am spending, so I don't particularly like that solution. So that was where it began, sort of high degree of pain, episodic needs. Once we started doing it, we started having customers say to us, God, this thing is great, but I wish I'd had this before I built my $100 million building. And it is to your point, but I think, Asaf, you make such a great point, which is, it is sort of shocking when you think about how these massive buildings are built, and Seattle is no exception, that there is some degree of, okay, this is what we're doing today. And so we've started having customers actually come to us and say, help me make more data-driven decisions as to what I build, unit mix, pricing structure, amenities programming, how I take this asset to market in such a way that I can generate the highest rent rates, get stabilization as quickly as possible, and make sure that all of those pre-leasing and leasing dollars, which are a significant investment, produce the highest ROI. So I think it's actually very interesting that what began as an episodic need has now moved back into sort of pre-development requests and has moved forward into people saying, there's underperforming assets, but there's also a huge amount of upside to capture. So a typical asset or portfolio manager has, the bottom 20% of their portfolio that keeps them up at night, and the top 20% of their portfolio that they really like to talk about. And then they've got sort of 60% in the middle that they have limited ability to really be maximizing and optimizing. So I think what people are realizing is, I can make smarter decisions earlier, I can more quickly get out of situations of underperforming assets, and then also there's just this huge amount of upside I can capture. If you think about kind of typical stabilization being 95%, what if it could be 96%? What if you could minimize sort of volatility within that stabilization range? And that starts to be significant at an asset level, but really impactful across a portfolio.
Kind of a follow-on, what are you seeing with the platform you're building and the feedback you're getting from early customers around that same pain point about amenities, margins, where are we going to capture the next dollar of profit? How can we maybe differentiate where we're capturing profit or income?
I mean, it used to be like, hey, listen, there's a laundry bank, down there, and let's try and tell more people about how to do their laundry down there, so they could increase the amount of coins that get put in there, but realistically, as technology continues to increase and as we start, getting a little bit more adaptive, we start seeing that there's, some really, really unique things that we can start doing with duration, based upon the fact that, not all consumers want to be bound by 12 months, 18 months. And if you allow them, a 3-month lease, maybe if you pre-furnish some of your properties, they're gonna actually have, a greater expansion of NOI, You know, and so there's a lot of different things that we can start doing to start really kind of looking at that asset and start taking some of those units and augmenting what we do with them. Now, of course, you have to have, you know, the right platform that allows you to do all that and, you know, really gives you those insights. But, you know, that's something that is really interesting to us. You know, we've got, you know, Amazon that just created Hub. You know, so it's essentially a locker, and you know, we know that millennials have on average 3 deliveries a month, and that's a lot of packages, especially when you start talking about a, you know, multi-hundred unit complex.
Did you say three per month or 3 per week?
Well, 3 per month is currently right now. And
I think I'm doing better than that at my house. And
You're
I'm
not
even
at my
millennial.
house.
Well, it's not my house either, but you know, it's so interesting to kind of see these different the opportunities that we have. A lot of properties are now requesting, or at least the consumer is requesting, that they only want to live at a property that allows them to sublet. You know, and that's another, you know, income opportunity. You know, in spite of what we might think about the millennial generation, they're pretty damn savvy, and so when you start kind of thinking about the fact that, yeah, maybe they have low income, maybe they have high debt, but they know how to make you know, little iterative amounts of money from a lot of different types of gigs and opportunities that are available to them. So those are the types of things that a lot of property owners need to at least start considering. You know, I'm not telling you what to do, but at the same time, we are, you know, dramatically increasing NOI for certain properties that we're working with.
I'm happy you brought up this whole confluence of short and long term. What was it, this week or last week? I think I saw that a company, and I can't remember the name, raised north of $200 million for a hotel apartment concept. So I think you're talking along the same thing, whether it's apartment owners that are launching a new property and choosing to Airbnb or do short-term rentals, or almost in order to fill up stuff fast because it takes a while to fill a new apartment building. Now, but then again, that's going to be something that you're going to have to consider from the get-go, perhaps like even in Seattle where they're limiting Airbnb, or whether you have certain rules, regulations, codes. Are you seeing any kind of request into that sort of thing, Asaf, about I want to know what I can build and whether I'm going to have that flexibility with what I'm building later?
Yeah, but I want to say before that, we're talking about Seattle, but I think that there are many cities that people just want to live there. You know, I think the whole sublet, the whole hotel kind of, I think it fits some cities and maybe some more trendy, more in-demand kind of cities that we can talk about. But at the end of the day, France is huge, the US is huge. There are many cities where people just want to live, you know. But I do think that we are trying to, in a way, to create this kind of change that I wouldn't say I have. Sorry, I got it off. But can you repeat the first question, because the first.
It was, you know, are you seeing owners look for, when they go to build something,
Yeah.
wanting that flexibility up front with code, knowing
Yeah.
that later on, who knows, maybe I want it to be a long-term normal apartment
Yeah.
complex, but I want that flexibility to rent rooms for the night, etc. You know,
Yeah,
that
so-
kind of flexibility.
So this what we're trying. It's a kind of in lab phase. But what we are trying right now is to allow the developer, for example, to let us in advance know what he knows about the best in demand market right now. What will be the right mix regarding facade, regarding number of rooms, and then the algorithm will be able to kind of give him the most optimal kind of layout of that building. But since we are right now dealing with selling apartments and not just renting ones, so we're talking about something a bit more not as flexible as what you're describing right now. I guess that once our model goes into more renting kind of model, so we will have to allow this kind of flexibility. But what we are trying to kind of figure out right now is what's the right balance between this kind of allowing too much flexibility rather than trying to stick to something which is somewhere in the average. Because I think that at the end of the day, having too much to choose from doesn't generate that much profit. That's our understanding. So we need to find the right balance between those two things.
Yeah, I mean, I think to data and to what it is that you do. I mean, there's 2 separate properties that just went up, you know, based upon information of what is it that you're actually building. Over 250 units, and both of those properties have over 90% studio apartments. and you start thinking about that, that never would have happened, 7, 8 years ago. And so it's so interesting to just see, what consumer demand is requesting, what home prices are driving, and what jobs are driving towards urban areas.
Where's that? Where else?
There's one in Ballard, one in Madrona.
So let's chase that for a minute. I think one of the most interesting things we've seen on the office side is the rise of WeWork, the shared office space, where we start to see space as a service, not as just I'm renting a box. Are we seeing that same sort of thing in multifamily? And I kind of want to tack onto this. What are you seeing as far as wanting smaller and smaller, that rise of micro apartments? We've seen some of those, or pod apartments here. And on the other hand, shared, almost like dorm living for adults. I've even seen the concept now of almost dorm living for families, where families will come together, and because of the high cost in some cities like Seattle, wanting to have some shared amenities like shared living rooms, but some space to themselves. What are you seeing come in and around that? And I'm basically, any of you can take this.
This is where I get geeked out. So, this is the space that has really kind of defined who I am as a human being. Having to move so much, loving different cultures, and just the idea of, being around people and learning, and has just been hugely impactful to my life. And so it's been hugely impactful kind of to Leasera and the product that we ended up eventually building, which was, we serve with a property management software system, the long-term rental. And with that, we are kind of going one step further to say, well, renters are consumers, and so therefore, why do you not direct and unify access to various different opportunities that consumers are demanding? You increase retention, you increase the amount of LTV of those consumers, and you also serve the surrounding community of subject matter experts, whether it be like a dog walking, ride share, so on and so forth. So there's just a whole bunch of opportunities, and this is all just based upon what consumers are demanding, and us kind of taking a look back at that and going, oh well, there's not to dumb it down, but there's a buck we can make from that. There's ways in this market, as margins decrease and as things get far less differentiated, frankly, that competition is going to be heavy. And so how is it, as a property owner, that we look at an asset and go, okay, well, how am I going to maximize that? And again, and thanks to you guys, you guys are looking at the data early on to kind of help that property owner, or that asset owner, or that builder, really look at that in a much deeper way. I'm coming in after the fact and going, okay, well, we already got this. How is it that you can make that, maximum NOI? How is it you can make it maximum satisfaction for the consumer? And how is it that you can serve those various different needs? So.
I just want to add that, but sometimes we need to be aware of trends, and I think that when you're doing with real estate development, is actually building stuff, things take time and trends change, and sometimes we need to kind of assist the developer in trying to assist them what would be the right mix that will sell the best. But regulation-wise, zoning-wise, they're not always in sync with our trends. So we need to find the right balance. We need to find a nice way to kind of trick those regulation-wise in order to kind of satisfy those needs, but it doesn't always go in sync. So I think all those trends about micro apartments and this kind of co-sharing and stuff, we try to answer those needs. But regulation-wise, you can't really do this thing from scratch, for example, building permits and stuff. So in a way, I think that we are trying to give some more sustainable long-term solutions to think about apartments that could sell and could satisfy those trends, and still in the long run could satisfy some different trends. So that's a real big challenge for us as well.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that. I think part of what we get really excited about is the ability to empirically quantify what affects change in a building. And owners often sit there and they say, would I be better to knock these 2 apartments into one and make it a gym, or would it be better to turn these into guest suites? Or there's so much speculation in building the building, to your point, and then once you have the building, there's so much speculation in what's working, and am I getting $4 a foot because I've got a really good kegerator in the lobby, or am I getting $4 a foot because people love my property manager, or is it because I'm willing to offer 2 months free parking? And so part of what I get really excited about is the ability to provide this sort of degree of unprecedented insight that the industry has never had in terms of what is actually moving the lever as it relates to your asset performance, and how should that be influencing asset strategy decisions that people make. So I just think we continue to see that people have hypotheses as to what they should do, and then when they did it, why things did or didn't change, but it's very hard to quantify. And so I think this was sort of an interesting roundup in terms of past, present, and future. That is exciting in terms of just thinking about what would happen if an owner could truly understand, here are 3 different asset level changes I could make, be it to the product, be it to the promotions, be it to pricing, and what's going to generate the highest ROI, and to understand the nuance of that in Salt Lake versus Sacramento. It starts to become really exciting.
Are you seeing different regional trends like this where the amenities or what people are asking for within, let's say, Seattle differs really greatly from other urban areas?
Yeah, so I think it's really interesting. So Remarkably is basically marketing analytics and insight software, full funnel analysis. And what's fun is there are some national averages and benchmarks, but we actually do see quite a bit of market and even micro market nuance as it relates to volumes, conversions, cost pers, just pure budgets, what people want, why they stay in a building, why they leave a building. So I think to Barrett's point about the fact that these are unique consumers, so you have to fill your building, right? You've got year 1 to fill your building. Now half your building is going to move out every year thereafter, effectively. So you're in constant sort of, ongoing lease up, and then you're going to have external trigger points. A new competitor comes in, your property manager leaves, you have an event in the building. And so what I think is really interesting is this one size fits all really doesn't work, and the B2C space has gotten really smart at really understanding hyper responsive targeting. Multifamily hasn't gone there yet, and there are some complexities attached to it, but we do see that by market and even by micro market, there are some pretty significant differences.
I do want to kind of chase one thing for a moment that you brought up around the turnover. I had an interesting conversation with a family office that owns quite a bit of multifamily property here in the Puget Sound, and he mentioned that, look, if I could just simply get even just a 3% increase, or I should say decrease in loyalty, in turnover, he said the amount of money that I could add to the bottom, the gravy would be incredible. So I know, Barrett, how does that, on one hand, you're talking about allowing less than 12 months. Doesn't that seem to go against what most property managers want? Help us understand, how do you drive loyalty, but at the same time you're giving people choice?
Well, so that's where she and I come in, right? When it comes to really insightful data and trying to understand kind of what those indices are going to be, that's what tells you whether or not you're going to go with short term. Because frankly, if you do short term, we all know that you can charge more. And so if you are okay with slight turnovers, which a lot of property managers are for different reasons, that's something that you can really bank on. But yeah, it's a big movement.
I think the other thing that's just super interesting is, again, real estate has always been super focused on the front door, sort of no pun intended, right? Let's get people to the building, let's get them through the front door, let's get them to sign a lease, and let's get them in the building. We do see that improving retention is often one of the most kind of underutilized and undervalued levers in the asset strategy. So you're exactly right. But I think what we've seen is that people think about their building performance. So customers will come to us with a building problem. I'm spending $15,000 a month on marketing for my building. I'm only at 90% occupancy, and my rents are 50 cents a foot less than I would like them to be. But they haven't analyzed their sales funnel the way other industries traditionally would to understand, my issue is that I have a 63% retention, I have a 63% cancellation and denial rate versus the industry average of 50. So I think the ability to actually start isolating where are the specific components so people can get much more sophisticated in what they need to address. Is this a volume issue? Is it a conversion issue? Where is the issue? Starts to become, really exciting. And then you can actually go fix the problem.
Yeah, we all know that it costs more to get a new customer than to keep one. That just really, at the end of the day, it's just basic metrics. And every other industry seems to understand it. and yet we seem to be okay in the multifamily space to just see this constant cyclical cycle of all of our tenants, they're going to come in the door and out the door the next year. Well, the reality is that if we just started, really focusing on what it is their needs are, instead of adding more administration to the issue, which is what we do. I mean, don't worry about it. We pride ourselves on being super hyper efficient on turnover, and it only costing $1,500. I heard somebody boast about that the other day. I was like, well, but what are you doing for retention? Oh, well, that's the same number. We've got 60% year over year. It's just our market. This is how it reacts. So we were with them for 6 months and increased their retention by 5%. And they're like, oh, we kind of did this kind of recap, afterwards, had that conversation with them, and the economic impact for them was just below $250,000. And it's not something that people fully consider, and but at the same time, we're starting. We're beginning to truly understand what those indices are and truly how to create loyalty within the multifamily market.
One last question I'm going to toss to all of you, and then we'll do Q&A for the audience. Barriers to tech adoption. Coming from tech, and then I'm seeing some smiles there, but we typically in the tech industry, and having been involved with multiple startups, many times your worst competitor, the competitor that gives you the most trouble, is simply doing nothing. So what are you seeing in each of your respective areas, and I'll start with you, SF, about how you're getting over it. I know you touched on this a little bit, but what are the biggest barriers to tech adoption from your standpoint?
So I think that for us, we're talking about scalability regarding regulation. We have a lot of people being very skeptical about the fact that we can adopt and scale up quickly regarding to new places, new zoning regulations, being updated with zoning regulations, upzoning MHA, for example, the whole different incentive methods. So I think, first of all, will be a lot of people being skeptical about it. Second of all, would be about the whole kind of doubt in AI and automation of design process, for example. People still think, and I'm an architect, that you do need an architect in order to optimize design, and we need to make sure that people really understand that this algorithm and this kind of software would allow the optimized design for a building. And the third thing, and that's something going overseas, would be about culture, that about where people want to live, how they want to live, what's their standards of living. So I guess that's one of the biggest barriers we've got.
Yeah, so I think there are a couple. So one, I think there's just this massive amount of PropTech fatigue right now. So PropTech is new and it's exciting, but for those that were kind of in the early days of it, there's now sort of this onslaught, and everywhere you turn, there's a new company starting, and there's a new gizmo and gadget and software and system. And so I think there is this degree, particularly at the large institutional owner, institutional manager perspective of let's let them all duke it out and see who's still standing here in 6 to 12 months and let them go figure it out. So I think there's a degree of PropTech fatigue. I think there is maybe the pendulum has swung a bit too far in that people are thinking, great, here's software, here's the silver bullet. It is real estate, it is brick and mortar, it is a human experience, and I think people perhaps underestimated the need to really make the onboarding experience successful, make customer success a core part of your business model, ensure that your users are engaging with your tool and your platform. So I think there is this degree of sort of shell shock by owners and managers. I think there's a degree of the sort of PropTech providers needing to understand that there is still going to be a service element to your business, despite the investors sort of, looking in horror at you. And then I think lastly that there have been all these solutions, and we hear from owners and managers all the time, I use 10 to 15 different software systems to manage my property. And there hasn't been any way to aggregate, to correlate, to understand causation versus correlation. There hasn't been any platform to manage all these various providers, and there hasn't been any platform to understand the effectiveness of them. So that was frankly the white space that drove Remarkably, was to say, wait a minute, we have had this massive glut now of PropTech solutions, but there's no mechanism to actually handle the implementation and management and measurement of all of those. So I think those have been kind of the biggest points.
I think from my standpoint, and obviously we have slightly different technologies, and so we look at the market in a slightly different way. But for me, it's managing a large asset like this is very scary. At the end of the day, there's multiple different layers, multiple different responsibilities, and large, big systems or big incumbents, of 20, 30 years ago that came in, like Yardi. Appfolio's now, I think over 20 years old. And you've got RealPage and so on and so forth. And so you've got these big, multi-billion-dollar organizations that have built out these systems. They've had countless demands from different property owners over the years for, literally 73 different types of reports. And so you've got these massive systems that are relatively difficult to use. And so trying to upend those things is a really, really difficult challenge. And properties are going to sit around for multiple decades. And so you're going to have these large institutions, as she's saying, that are super embedded. They're super used to them. And if you look at that tiered bit of operations, you've got regional managers and property managers that are so used to a system and literally freaked out about using something new. And so every single time you say to a property owner, which usually is where the cost is put off to, if not the renter, you have somebody saying, hey, listen, I've got the silver bullet new system or new piece of bolt-on software. It doesn't really bolt on, but hey, don't worry, I've got data we'll push it through. And you're telling that to the property owner, and the property owner goes, how much is it gonna hurt? That's it. That is literally the response and the feeling that you get nowadays. And granted, we're going to have in the Seattle market, in upwards of about 20,000 new units, maybe even upwards of 30,000, depending on how our market reacts by 2022. So there's going to be a huge amount still in development and still slated for prop up. And so you're going to have new opportunities and new systems that are going to be introduced, and you're going to have new, new people coming into the market to manage those systems as well. So there's opportunity, and yeah, there's property or PropTech fatigue for sure, but it is also a big market, and as Erina said, there's going to be a massive amount of consolidation as these systems start gaining a little bit of traction. So you're going to see a lot of froth and a lot of dust kicked up in about 5 years from now.
All right, let's take some questions.
Speaking on value, do you have a rule of thumb? We were told by one of the property owners, if I just get $10,000 more a year, I'm going to increase the value of my building by $280,000. I know that's calculated with the cap rates and the GM, the gross rent margins and so on and so forth. But is there a rule of thumb that can be applied to say X number of value, whether it's reduced vacancy equals X number of dollars in the value of the ultimate building? Is that a realistic rule of thumb? Do you have anything?
So I think unfortunately the answer is no, because it's so influenced by your building, your rent rates, your unit size, your unit mix, what the lever is. I think we do think about some various best practices in terms of what should the relationship be between the cost per executed lease and an average, basically your lowest market rate, kind of monthly rate in your building. So we think about things like that, or what should your return on investment relationship be between investment into marketing and leasing and the revenue change. But I think in terms of sort of a kind of great calculator, because if there was, we'd have it on our website, of being able to calculate it. It is highly related to the asset, but I think there are good benchmarks at various KPIs, such as what should your CAC to LTV be, what should your cost pers be in each layer of the sales funnel, but I don't have a good simple answer to that one.
I think the nice thing is that we are beginning to really further identify and get far more granular about all the opportunities that can be tackled right now. And so it's, it's organizations like the ones sitting up here that really can, dig down and based upon whatever geography, you're in, whatever town you're in, whatever type of demographic is kind of, saturating that particular market. There's a lot of different things that you can kind of identify and tease out. So it really is just kind of some math, science, and magic all together. Yeah, well, the Zestimate did a pretty good job with that, right? Or CoStar.
My turn? Okay, yeah. What do you think about the co-living concept? And we see that more and more projects which just falls like the studio and like the large common area with. So what do you think about that?
I think it's short-lived. I think that there's a massive demographic that is going to come through that is going to be intrigued by it and be accepting of it. But there's only so many bad food events in the kitchen, and people that got too drunk and pissed on the carpet, that people are going to be willing to deal with. And so you're really going to have this situation where it's going to be right for some people for some time, and but at the same time, I think that's what's going to open up other types of opportunities, and we kind of think about this utilization evolution. And so I think that you're going to see different models pop out because of that, that are going to be pretty interesting.
I think this is not a new concept. I think I remember my grandfather talking about this. It was called a boarding house.
Who owns for Remarkably, Sarah, who owns the data once they input it, and who has access to it, and how is it monetized, or does the person that puts it in gets to hold it?
Yeah, so in the case of Remarkably, so we aggregate data from multiple different platforms. So it could be a Yardi, RealPage, Google Analytics, their GL, their various marketing plugin systems. The customer owns their data. When the platform comes into the when the data comes into the platform, we do also have a degree of basically anonymizing it so that you can start to understand portfolio averages, benchmark averages, national averages. So their data is theirs coming in, and then the analysis that we do on top of that is then our proprietary data that comes out of it. And that's something that we're super excited about, is basically this sort of first ever cross-platform, cross-owner, cross-manager national data set that the industry has actually never had, which starts to be really exciting. So you can start to understand, for a 5/2 versus a high-rise in Salt Lake versus San Francisco with a resident set that looks like X, that looks like Y, what are going to be the most effective marketing techniques?
For us, it's individual and then aggregate. So individual data is owned by the individual group, and then aggregate data is owned by us. And so, that's really, when you start thinking about software, at the end of the day, that's really, depending on how you utilize your own personal information, as a company, that's either your data moat or it's what it is that you're selling to other people. And there's a lot of different ways that you can kind of hack that up, but that's the way we do it, and we utilize it as our moat. So it's slightly different.
I'm a novice, so I can only ask you very basic things, AI related. So the AI right now being adopted by many other industries, still overrated. Think about AI, how smart it is. That's BS. But in your industry, how do you, AI is basically, there's a couple of things. You have to have enough data. Data has to be clean. The data go into it, then the technical readiness has to be there, and also culture readiness has to be there. Manager all ready. Then you can say this place is AI ready. For your industry, for example, how do you figure out a tenant? What he's thinking? What he's thinking, he telling you he's going to leave. He said, well, because my job changed. You don't know he tell the truth or not, though, unless you have a longitude follow all the time. So Facebook built forever to this point, have a little bit of data. Even that data is not accurate. How can you say your industry can be accurately adopt AI, say in the next 10 years. So it's a puzzle for me.
Yeah, I mean that's been a model of every software company ever, right? That ever has used a user, to try and figure out, okay, well, based upon how an individual is coming into that website or that application, where are they clicking, where is their cursor going, how many clicks did it take to get them to X, Y, and Z, and all of that stuff is being tracked. So whether or not you think that you're kind of living in anonymity, you're not. I mean, that's just kind of the way it is. You can even be on DuckDuckGo, and they still have ways of being able to understand exactly what it is that you're searching and why. But when you start talking about a tenant and you start thinking about, okay, well, how did that individual go from a lead through, CoStar, or, and then how did they create that application? What did they put in that application? How long did it take them to fill out that application? What is it that you understand about their income? They had to talk about the previous three places they lived before they're applying to this particular location. So that information, and so there's an immense amount of information that is in fact available, and it's just a matter of how you use it, whether or not you're trying to use it for good to promote that individual's further success moving forward, or whether or not you're trying to kind of cordon people in like potentially an insurance company.
Yeah, so I would actually just love to add that. So AI is really popular to talk about, right? And as real estate is a bit of a laggard, we're even a little bit late to the concept of it. I actually think it's going to be much more exciting to see what happens in the ML space, the machine learning space in real estate. So in its simplest form, if you think about it, you kind of go back to the data pyramid 101, right? So it used to be that real estate didn't have data. Now real estate has data, but it's drowning in it. From there, the next layer that people want is visualization. Make this pretty for me to understand instead of 10 or 15 different spreadsheets. There are BI solutions that are doing that. From there, what people want are insights. What does any of this actually mean? And that's the point when the air starts to get pretty thin in the space, because I think really what people then want are recommended actions. What should I do? And then they want measured results. What were the outcomes of those actions? And so that's where I think we start to get really excited about a future state ML loop, where you can imagine a certain data set produces an insight, which produces a recommended action, which produces a measured result, and the ability to start analyzing that based on specific markets, specific audiences, that becomes really exciting. And so I think AI is sexier because it has the word artificial intelligence in it. But the ML play, I think, is actually going to be really, really interesting in the PropTech space. As to your point, you get better data aggregation, there's less garbage in, garbage out, you've got better sort of cross-pollination across data sets and the ability to measure those. So that's where we get excited about it.
Next.
While we're waiting for the next question, I actually just saw a program that was a machine learned program. They called it AI, but everybody calls it AI, right? But watched based upon building codes, a machine learned engineering program actually build an entire building. It was a multifamily. I think they did 123 units based upon the configurations and expectations of the community and based upon the engineering specs of that particular property. So that's pretty cool.
SF, I have a question on what you guys specifically are doing. Are you doing ground up? Are you doing renovations, repositions? What is it?
We're talking about ground up. Yeah, demolition, building.
So you don't do any renovations at all?
No, not at this point. No,
I'm just curious how you came to that conclusion, because there's a ton of other stuff going on out there,
right,
particularly in Seattle as well.
Right.
That it would seem logical that you might be interested in, but that's why I asked.
So, well, that's why I'm here to learn. But I think that from our experience in France is that going from ground up makes much more sense within our product right now. The scale of it, the margins, and our customers right now, that's what they ask for. I guess if we have customers that actually have the need for those kind of things, that might be worthwhile trying to get into it.
This is kind of a follow-up question. And I've worked, I'm an architect, I've worked in Seattle and Paris, so I have some idea from that. And I've also wondered, from a development point of view, whether, I've looked at like the zoning here, and I've tried to work with title companies to kind of see where the next highest and best use opportunities are and that sort of thing. And so I buy properties accordingly, you know. Hard to do. So my understanding is you're kind of doing a 3D modeling of the city, is that right? And then kind of picking opportunities based on that as a developer, or with your clients that are developers, is that correct?
Yeah, so what we do is basically we aggregate all the data, and then we kind of produce this treasure map that will show you all those underdeveloped parcels regarding zoning regulation, what's already built there, what's going to be the buffer wall, you can actually build more on top of this parcel. Once you go into this parcel, the algorithm will show you exactly the optimized volume of what you can build there, because it will take into account regulations, of course, building costs, what's going to be the selling point per square feet. And once you've got this volume, you can either get it by the algorithm or you can actually modify yourself. And with alert anytime you kind of cross one of those regulation zones. And then once you decide on what's the optimized volume for you, you're going to start to collaborate online with other stakeholders, for the architect, for example. So you as a developer with the architect will be working online on developing this specific parcel.
Okay, but this is like a BIM model with the building information modeling, where
exactly.
You've got a spreadsheet and everything that goes with that to give your data to the developer, right?
Yeah, exactly. Okay. And what we're trying to do is basically modify this balance sheet as well, according to your understanding of the market and your expertise within your development, for example. So our data would give you our understanding and kind of the average of all data available for development costs, for example, and profit. But then once you decide this is the parcel you actually want to develop, so you're going to modify it according to your own customized needs.
Okay, good, thank you.
And I just want to add something else about, because you're from Paris, you worked in Paris, I guess. And I think that this whole, as an architect, we have a lot of doubts about a machine being able to kind of analyze properly zoning regulation and trying to find the most optimized building within the existing framework of urban zoning regulations. And I think that the trend we see right now is trying to make those zoning regulations more accessible and more easy to understand in order to increase this development in places that need development. I guess city centers are actually craving for more units and actually trying to simplify the whole process and upzoning, for example. So I think that the next challenge for companies like us is actually trying to gather all those incentives, all those new things that only local architects would be able to kind of identify and know and put it within this kind of custom algorithm method of thinking. So that, me as an architect, I was very skeptical about it, but now I have to say that AI, machine learning, it has a lot of potential of actually trying to find those optimizing things.
Thank you all for your time. I'm wondering if you envision or if you anticipate, similar to like the hotel industry, the insights, sort of flipping the script, providing that to the future tenant instead of the landlords to sort of optimize pricing in that way, asking for someone who would pay for that, asking for a friend. So I'll say for us, you know, at the moment we are focused on sort of radical focus of you know, kind of core business at the moment. But what you're talking about is exactly where we see basically future state. Is that, and it's actually interesting because there's some interesting dovetails to what Barrett's doing, which is, you know, once you've built a data set that this industry has never had, how do you then use it to empower the consumer? And what is the network effect that comes with that? And what is the ability for landlords and owners and managers to have much better understanding of who their resident sets are and how they move around and how do you monetize from cradle to grave in relation to that, but then also what do the residents do with that data and knowledge. So for us, we're not on that side of the aisle yet, but the kind of future state data set network effect is definitely on the horizon, but it's a long horizon at the moment.
And I can't wait when you are. Yeah, so for us, you know, we're really excited about the ability to essentially maintain a relationship with someone wherever they lay their head. And so whether it be their long-term residence or their business or leisure travel location, you know, that's ultimately what Leasera wants to do. You know, it just came out of the premise of if you truly want to value a consumer, you have to understand who they are as a consumer. And really that's like a piece of data, right? It's kind of like playing phone tag. Well, if that data, disintegrates over time, and we can't get it from A to B, then really, how do you value anything? And so for us, being able to maintain a relationship with that consumer allows us to give deeper discounts, more direct relationships, more loyalty points, etc., that benefit that consumer moving forward, to the point where we truly believe that as this millennial generation gains their foothold and future generations, that maybe you never don't become a renter. Maybe you don't buy a home, and I've been kind of screamed blasphemy at me, by a lot of the relationships that I currently have as clients, because they also have, purchasable assets as well. And, so that's our goal, frankly, is that I believe that we can drive so much value to the everyday renter, that they will always rent.
And if you think that's an interesting subject, come to next month's, because I think that's partially what we're going to talk about, is trying to open commercial real estate investment to a much wider audience. So say that you could rent all for your entire life, and instead put money into commercial returns on a commercial property instead. One more question, and then we'll wrap it up. Or maybe not. All right.
Yeah, just picking up on this last theme about what are the benefits to consumers of trying to reduce the inefficiency in the current market system. Maybe each of you could kind of talk about where you see inefficiencies and how your solution could help consumers.
Yeah, so I think this is a really interesting one, because so there are about 20 million units in the U.S., and there's an average, there's a target stabilization of 95% occupancy. Many buildings don't achieve that, or have this sort of constant yo-yo effect where they're at 95, everyone's feeling good, they slide down to 90, everyone kind of crosses their fingers and closes their eyes, they get into the high 80s, they dump rent rates, they buy residence, they move back up. And so what I think about it is just certainly related to basically new inventory. So of the 20 million units, if we could improve occupancy simply via better marketing and better management by 1%, what would that reduce in terms of the requirement of new construction? So I do think there is a sustainability play here in terms of when you look at the available number of apartments, if you had more effective and efficient filling and then stabilization of those, that I start to think starts to become an interesting angle of 95% is sort of the golden rule, and that's what everyone's trying to achieve. It doesn't often. And so if you could just reprove that nominally, what does that do in terms of the need to then not produce more product?
Yeah, currently, right now in Seattle Metro proper, it's 5.6%, I think, is the vacancy rate for Class A plus. So, you've got this systemic issue of then turning around and going, okay, well, we're going to give consumers concessions. And right now, for 16 months, I think it's a 6-week concession, and that comes right off the top line. So, if you really truly understand what it is that consumers are after, you're not necessarily giving concessions. You're giving just continuous rewards or opportunities, and really directing them towards the things that they're looking for already, which is the dog walking, the ride share, the access to groceries and all the things that they need to make their lives efficient, convenient, easy, accessible, because that's kind of the renter's way right now. So, it's information and understanding that I think is really going to improve just what it is that we're delivering, not just from the consumer level, but what that consumer is then going to in turn, start providing the property owner as well with information, access, and understanding.
So our users are developers, but I actually want to talk about our users, basically about people eventually going into those houses that developers build. So people want to live in city centers, people want to live, we're seeing this renaissance of people moving back into city centers. So we want to make sure that our users actually are able of living in those places. by actually optimizing and maximizing all those building rights in city centers, and while they're actually living in the right size for their own kind of needs. So I guess what we're talking about is basically optimizing people's needs and preferences regarding living in city centers.
Let's give a big round of applause to our panelists.